All right, so today we're going to be talking about solving absolute value functions. Okay, so if I have an absolute value, let's say I have the absolute value of 2x plus 3 equals 6. In this situation, you need to break down your you need to break this down into two equations. Okay, and when I mean that is you're going to have to negate these values. Okay, so when I do this, you break this down into two equations. Now, what's inside of the absolute value stays exactly the same. Okay, so one equation is going to be 2x plus 3. The other equation, so 2x plus 3 equals 6. And the other equation is going to be 2x plus 3 equals negative 6. You're negating both of them. And the reason why you would do that is because think about this value that's inside the absolute value. Okay, if this was a negative 6, the absolute value of negative 6, absolute value of negative 6 is going to equal positive 6. The absolute value of positive 6 is going to equal 6, right? So either way, the values are going to happen, okay? And that's what we're talking about here. This is why you get your two options. So here we're going to solve for x in this situation, subtract 3 to both sides, okay? We get 2x equals to 3, divide both sides by 2, and x is equal to 3/2 or 1.5, right? However you want to say it. In this situation over here, we subtract 3 to both sides. Now we get the equation 2x equals negative 9, right? Divide both sides by 2, and we get our other equation, x equals negative 9/2. Now, in this situation, these would be our acceptable answers. And the reason why you wouldn't have to check is because there's no value over here that's going to change this piece right here. So this is always what you want to look for. What I always talk about is the opposite values. And I know I got ahead of myself, but I do want to talk about these pieces. Okay, the absolute value of x is always going to be greater than or equal to 0. Okay, an absolute value can never be equal to a negative number. Absolutely cannot. Okay, and when you think about this situations, make sure that you understand if I ever have the absolute value of x is equal to a negative number, that means right away this negative number, that should tell you that this is a no solution. Now, you got to be careful because when we say no solution, we have to make sure that the absolute value is isolated. Okay. When I mean isolated, I mean you got to kind of treat that as a variable and make sure everything disappears. Right. So here I'm going to give an example. Let's say I have this equation, right? The absolute value of x minus 1 plus 2 equals 1. Now, right now, at first glance, it looks like there's a solution to this because you're equal to a positive number. But this absolute value needs to be isolated first. And in order to isolate it, you got to get rid of this plus 2. The only way to get rid of that plus 2 is to subtract 2 to both sides. Now, what's going to happen? That plus 2 goes away. You're left with the absolute value of x minus 1 is equal to negative 1. Okay, that right there is a straight indicator that from here on, it's no solution. This is why you need to make sure that you isolate this absolute value, treat it as if it's its own variable, right? See if this is like, pretend like this is y plus 2 equals 1, right? And solve for y, right? And that's what we're treating this absolute value as. And in this case, there's no solution because right here, it's equal to a negative value. An absolute value will never, ever, ever be equal to a negative number. Okay? So let's go ahead and try it again. So let's say we have 2 times the absolute value of x minus 5 plus 6 equals 10. Right? Now, in this situation, we have two things. One thing that I want you guys to make sure that you're aware of is the 2 times absolute value of x minus 5. Again, you're treating this as if it's its own variable, as if it's by itself. So treat it as if this was 2 times y plus 6 equals 10, and you were solving for y. Okay? First thing you want to get rid of is this plus 6. So we subtract 6 to both sides. We're good so far. We have 2 times the absolute value of x minus 5 is equal to 4. Okay? Still positive number. Okay? Then we divide both sides by 2. And we get absolute value of x minus 5 is equal to 2. Now, that's good. That 2 is a positive, so now we can break this up into our two equations, right? My first equation, x minus 5 equals 2. Solve for x. Add 5 to both sides. Add 5 to both sides. X equals 7. Now, there's one of my solutions. The second solution is x minus 5 equals negative 2. Because remember, if I put a negative 2 in here, the absolute value of negative 2 gives me positive 2. Okay? So, then I add 5 to both sides. That cancels out. Okay? And I'm left with x is equal to 3. All right? So, those are my two solutions. X equals 3 and x equals 7. All right? Now, on the next video, we'll talk about inputting these back in and finding extraneous solutions. But this one's just solving for the absolute values. So some notes to take that you want to make sure that you want to do is always, always, always isolate the absolute value. Okay, isolate the absolute value. Okay, then once you're done isolating that absolute value, right, you got it by itself, then you're going to solve two equations. Make sure that you flip the other equation. You're making sure that it's the opposite. You're negating the whole entire piece. Okay, so for instance, right, you have this absolute value of x, right, equals, I don't know, let's say negative 3, right? Or not negative 3, sorry, equals 3. All right, you have your two equations, x equals 3. But on the other side, x equals negative 3, because you want to go ahead and you want to negate this symbol. You're negating that whole side, right? Okay. And this is what you want to do to isolate, to solve for the absolute values. In the next video, we're talking about having variables on both sides. But this is just what we do for absolute values.